Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pattern called Radiant. We did this pattern in a video, but it's been about 6 years ago and I thought we might want to update it. Today I'm going to use a fat quarter bundle called Iris Garden. It's blues and purples, very pretty range of colors here, and so those will be for all of these blocks here. Then we need to add a dark accent and a light accent. So for the light accent, I think I will use this one. Now this is the same one that's in the fat quarter. I have more fat quarters than I need, so I will take that one out. And then for the dark accent, I want something really dark. This is not black, but it's kind of a black purple batik. And I think there's enough contrast between this and all of these colors so that that will show. Now if you don't want to use a solid for your background or an almost solid, you could use a print. Since all of my fabrics for the patchwork are the almost solid watercolor batiks, this would actually make a really nice background. But I think the quilt will be a little bit calmer if I go with this one. Radiant is a pattern from Cozy Quilt Designs. One thing I love about their patterns is they include multiple sizes. We've got baby all the way up to a king. I'm going to make the twin size, so I need 15 fat quarters. My bundle has 20, so I'm going to pull off the ones I'm not going to use. Okay, I've got my 15 all picked out. Keep in mind that if you have 16 or 17 or 18 that you like, you can use them all in the quilt if you want a bigger variety. You'll just have a few more scraps left over. So you don't have to limit yourself to just 15 just because that's what the pattern says. The cutting is very easy, and it's not my pattern, so I can't give you the exact sizes, but all of Cozy's are very easy to follow. All of the pieces are cut, and all we have to make is 2 simple blocks. The first block gets one of these big squares, an accent on the top and bottom, and then another, actually it's the light accent, a light accent on both sides. We'll stitch that one up, and then we'll move to this block. So we're going to use a dark accent in the middle, and we're going to use 4 of these guys, 2 of each size that are all the same color. And this block gets that on the top and bottom and that on the sides. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch up these first 2 blocks. The blocks are very easy to stitch up. Everything is exactly the right size. And all of the seam allowances are going to be pressed away from the middle. So I'm just going to finger press it. So I'm just pulling it open a little and then taking my fingernail right down that seam. And now that is the exact length for us to put this piece on. This seam also goes away from the middle. One last piece and the block is done. The second block, the pieces are a little bit different sizes, but it's exactly the same procedure. And we're still going to press the seam allowances toward the outside. So I'm just going by the pattern directions, which say to press these away from the center. You can press them toward the center if you're worried about any shadowing. Sometimes if your seams aren't perfect, you'll get a little shadowing behind there. You could press them toward the darker fabric if you like. It won't make any difference with the block construction. Even though I finger pressed, I still want to iron it. So I make sure everything is flat and lined up, and then add some steam, and the same thing with the second block. We're going to take these two blocks and we're going to put them together like we would when we're making half square triangles. So the first thing to do is to mark the back of this square on the back side right along the diagonal. And I'm just using a light pencil line. I'll do it a little bit darker in here. And we'll take these blocks over to the sewing machine. We're going to put the blocks right sides together, and I've got these seams going up and down and these seams going up and down. So they are exactly the same size. So we'll match everything up, and we're going to stitch on both sides of the line, 1/4 inch away from that drawn line. I'm going to cut this right along the drawn line. And let's see what the block looks like now. Look at how cool that is. So I'm going to go ahead and iron toward the darker color on both of these guys. I like to open the block and press this a little with my fingers because I don't want this big long seam to get bowed or convex, concave there. I want it to be nice and straight. So I usually press that seam with my hand a little bit and then add some steam. And that way the block stays nice and square. The last step is to cut these little dog ears off. And the pattern noted that your blocks should be about 9 1/8, but they may be a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, and it's not a big deal. You just want them all the same size. You can trim them all down a little bit, but it's probably not necessary. You're probably pretty consistent in how your seams are next to that drawn pencil line. So as long as all your blocks are the same size, you won't have to trim them down. What I'm going to do next is pull off the pieces I need for some different blocks and match them up with a color that I like that'll go with it. So I'll put this one with that. So I'll put all these into 4s like I've got here, and then put one of these colors with them. Make all the rest of the blocks, put them together, make those half square triangles, then we're ready to lay the quilt out. I've got the blocks all done. They're very fast to stitch up. Now the quilt is going to be 7 by 9 blocks. So we're not going to make a centered pattern. We're going to make a pattern that's a little bit offset. So we're going to put 4 of these the bigger dark pieces up here near the top of the quilt, and I'm just picking 4 different colors. And then we're going to start building around that. This is a pattern that you can turn lots of different ways, and you can make lots of different layout options. So let's just start putting the blocks out and see what we get. So what I'm doing is I've got that as the offset center of my quilt, and then I'm building a light diamond around it, then a dark diamond around it. So I'm going to keep building till I've got it 9 tall and 7 wide. All right, I've got the whole quilt laid out, and the colors were pretty easy to balance. I'm going to stand back and look and see if I have too much of one color in one spot or not enough of one color spread throughout the quilt. The colors blend pretty well, so it'll be pretty easy to trade around. Super quick to sew these together. There's no intersections to match within the block. There's nothing you have to match. So we'll just make rows and then sew those rows together. and then we've got 3 borders to add, and we can get it loaded onto the quilting machine. I'm looking at the pattern cover, and the layout's a little bit different, and I think I'm going to like that better. So I'm going to trade the pieces around, spin them around till it looks more like this, see if I like that even better. Now it's laid out more like the original version in the pattern, and I do like this better. I'm going to trade around a little bit some of the colors because these are pretty close. So I think I'll put a blue in here, but other than that, I think I'm going to go with this layout. The quilt is on the machine, and we need to pick a thread color. I didn't pick out anything really dark because I'm afraid it will fight with the patchwork, which is so nice. So this is the darkest one I have. Let's see what that will look like. It's going to show in the light, but it's not actually too strong. Now let's see, we've got a lighter lavender. It'll show a little bit in the darkest areas there. Blue, about the same effect, and this is just a little bit pinker, a little bit more lilac. I think I'm going to go with this blue. I think that'll look the best. Actually, I changed my mind. I think the lavender will look a lot better. There's more purple in the quilt, so I'm going to go with this one instead. The pattern I'm going to use is called Fluidity. I like it because it's very abstract. There's almost like some heart shapes in there, but here's what it looks like when you repeat it. It's going to fill up all the space nicely, and I'm going to love all those curves against the big triangles in the quilt. The Radiant quilt is all done, and it turned out nice and big. It's 80 by 97. The pattern says that's a twin, but that's a pretty big twin. It's almost a full size. I do like how the colors go around and around, and there's lots of different ways you could make this pattern more abstract. Instead of straight lines, you can you can change directions and go down this way. The quilting with the Fluidity pattern, it looks really good. I really like that against all these triangles. You can see it nicely on the border here. On the back side, that gives nice movement against these bursts of color. I like the back. I like to have the back look nice with the top, but not necessarily something that's in the top. We've got 3 borders, and that made the patchwork quite a bit bigger. Very, very fast quilt to make. It's one of the fastest quilts I've made. And this size took 15 fat quarters, but you can use more fat quarters if you like, if you want to get more variety of color in your quilt. Now, if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'd like to try out the Buckeye Beauty pattern. This is a strip club pattern, so it's going to use a jelly roll. And I've got one here from Robert Kaufman, and this is called Sweet Pumpkin Spice, and it's all sorts of pretty fall fabrics. One thing I really like about Cozy's patterns is that they come with multiple sizes. I'm going to make the long throw, so I'm going to need 33 of the jelly roll strips. And I'm going to use a light background, a little bit lighter than what they showed there. So what I want to do is pick out the darker pieces and not use the really light ones, because some of them are so light that they won't show up very well against the background. So it's a pretty colorful group, but let's see. These ones I won't use. So let me go ahead and pick out 33 and we'll get the cutting started. there's all the strips we're going to use. And there actually isn't any sub-cutting for the strips. We're going to leave them all long. We're just going to cut some strips out of the background. I can't give you all the sizes because it's not my pattern, but Cozy's patterns are always so easy to follow. You won't have any trouble getting all the sizes you need. That is all the cutting we have to do because all of the pieces are going to be made from strip units. So we're going to start making those strip units. The first thing we need is some of these strips to go with the background, and that's for all of these little squares here. So we're going to pick out some that will go there in a nice variety of colors. Then with the rest of the strips, we're going to be putting two together. So we're going to be sewing two of these together, and those are going to make all of these guys here. You probably can't see very well in the picture, but there's a little teeny patchwork thing in the middle. So these are all made from strip units as well. So again, you want a variety of colors there. For our first strip unit, these are for the little 4 patches. We're just going to take one background and one piece from the jelly roll, put them right sides together, and just sew down one long side. Now we want to finger press the seam allowance toward the darker color. For me, it's a lot easier, for some reason, if I turn it in this direction. Put the light down and then open up the dark piece. And I'm going to hold this open with the palms of my hands there, and then I'm going to pull down that seam. And so what I'm doing is finger pressing. So I want this to be all the way opened up, and then I'm just going to draw my fingernail or the pad of my finger right down that seam, and this will press it until I get to the ironing board to keep that seam allowance going the way I want. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with the rest of these strips. Even though we finger pressed, we still want to use the iron on these. So I'm just going to smooth it out with my hand, make sure it's nice and flat. And then I like to use a dry iron and then add steam. Next step is to subcut this into smaller segments. I'm going to line it up on a line on my cutting board, and then just use my blade here and cut the whole strip up into 2.5 inch wide pieces. You can save some time if you cut several all at the same time. A couple methods you can use. You can put one here, then you can put another one up here. You could actually line them all the way up your table. But what I like to do is take 2 of them and put them right sides together, because this is what we're going to use to make our next block. So I've got the seam allowances going in opposite directions here, so they're nesting, so there's not any extra bulk there, and I've lined up all the edges. And then when I cut this, let me show you what we're going to get. We have 2 pieces now that are going to get sewn together right here. The pieces are lined up, they're nested, and that's going to make our 4-patch block. So if I stack this like this, I can cut all the way down, and these will all make the same block. And that's okay. If you like to mix up your fabric so that every block is different, you can, but we're still going to have, I think we're going to have 6 different block combinations, and that's enough variety for me. Plus it saves so much time, because even if I pick these up and they get moved a little bit, they're almost exactly in the right position for me to stitch them together. All we have to do now is make sure our edges are lined up and our seam allowances are coming together right at that intersection there, and stitch along this edge. and we'll finger press this to one side. It doesn't matter which side you press to. Now we've got a nice little 4-patch block there. The next step is to make the second kind of strip unit. For this one, we need 2 of these colorful strips, and I'm just going to get 2 that are different colors, and we'll sew these together along one long edge. I'm going to press the seam allowance to one side, and I like to pick the darker color to press toward. None of these, you won't be able to see through any of these, but it's a good idea to press towards the darker color all the time, because then if there's any of your seam allowances showing through, they have a much less likely chance if they're going towards the dark. There, even though I haven't ironed it, it is flat enough for me to do the next step, and I can iron it afterward. The next step is to put this strip on top of this unit here and stitch on both sides of it. 1/4 inch away from that cut edge, and you'll notice since we've got pinked edges here, the pinked part, the jaggedy part, usually sticks off a little bit. Now I'll just swing it around and sew down the other side. It's important to not stretch anything and make sure that none of the fabrics move as you're sewing. So I like to grab it way far away from the needle there, hold on down here, and that keeps anything from traveling, and then the strip unit will be nice and flat. Be sure to give this a little ironing here. And now we can cut this, and we're going to be cutting it into triangles. The easiest way to cut it is with something called the strip tube ruler. The pattern does give you directions if you don't have this ruler for how to make your cuts. So I'm going to go all the way down to this far end here, and I'm going to put the 4.5 inch line on the stitching line, not on the raw edge, on the stitching line. So let me slide it down a little bit so I'm not on the seam of my mat there. I've got this line right on top of my stitching. I'm going to hold this down, move that aside, and now I basically have a half square triangle, but it's got a little bitty patchwork piece right there. Next step is to swivel your ruler around to the top edge, put that same 4.5 inch line on the stitching line, and make a new cut. Now you might be able to slide it all the way down and have it line up with this edge. If that edge doesn't look perfectly straight, you can slide it over a little bit and cut 2 times. So you can see as you go. Mine is still lined up almost exact there, so I'm going to make another cut. So here's a second square with the fabrics in opposite positions. So we've got one with the oranges, one with the peachy color there. And now we'll swivel it around again. And this time we for sure are going to have to make 2 cuts. So you can slide this all the way down so that the edge is on that cut edge. And then we'll cut here, make our second cut here. And we've got a third block here, and because we slid it all the way over, there isn't even a dog ear on that edge. There's one on this edge. Once we iron them, we will snip all of those off. Here's how these get ironed. Put the light fabric down, peel it open, and gently use your fingers to press it, keeping that diagonal seam nice and straight. Add a little bit of steam, and then trim off any dog ears. In this case, there's only one. On most of the blocks, we will have 2 dog ears. So remember, light down first, press toward the dark, trim off these guys, it'll reduce the bulk and make it easier to get the patchwork together. So I'm going to go ahead and make the rest of the strip units and get them all ironed and cut. I've got them all done, and we're going to take all of both of these kind of blocks to the sewing machine. The entire quilt is made using 2 of each block. We're going to take 2 of these and point the light ones toward the middle, and then we're going to grab 2 of these, and I'm probably going to pick ones that don't have the same color as that big strip there. So let's try this one. It's got green, but it's a different green. And then we'll use this one. And I try not to be real picky because it's not going to matter that much once the whole quilt is done. And all we have to do is sew this way and then this way. So I like to put them right sides together like this, leave that one there, slide this one over, and I usually leave that on the machine with just a little trail of thread between, and then slide the bottom half over and stitch it, because that way I don't have to worry if I've got one turned the wrong way or spun or anything like that. So we're going to press the seam allowance away from we're going to press it toward this big triangle. So I'm just going to finger press right now. And then we'll press this bottom one again toward the triangle. Then it's very easy to match that center intersection there. And I'm going to press the seam allowance to one side. It doesn't really matter which side you press it to. I'm going to press all of them going the same way. Once we have 4 of these done, I'll show you what a bigger block is going to look like. To finish the quilt, you can just make all your blocks into these and lay out the quilt from there. But I find it's easier to put 4 of these together. We're going to put these squares in the middle, and it almost makes an X. And then you can take these bigger blocks and lay out your whole quilt. So that's what I'm going to do. It's pretty easy to get them sewn up. Not all of the seam allowances will nest, so you may have, like right here, you've got the seam allowances both going the same way. So it can be a little bit of a challenge to get them to match, but you can stick a pin in. You can peel it back and look. Same thing right here at this intersection. Sometimes they will nest, like right here, these are nesting. Sometimes they won't. And I couldn't figure out any way to get them to all nest throughout the quilt because it's just the nature of this pattern. They won't all go in opposite directions. I'm going to press this one to the right, and I'm just finger pressing right now, and then this one to the left. Now when you're doing this, these blocks here are all straight grain. The grain is going the same direction as the seam, so you can pull that one pretty hard like this and it won't stretch. These blocks, the direction of the grain is all diagonal, so you want to be a little bit careful and just squash them down without stretching. So I'm just going to press it down like that. There, now we're getting a pretty good idea of what one big block is going to look like. So for the size I'm making, I think I've got to make 12 of these. And so then once I get all 12 done, we'll lay them on the table and then we can see what the whole pattern looks like. Now that these big blocks are done, we can get an idea of what the quilt is going to look like really quickly. And it makes a very interesting secondary pattern. So each one of the blocks looks like it has kind of an X in the middle. But when you put them together, these pieces come and make a bigger diamond effect. There, it's very easy to get the colors balanced because no matter how you turn the block, it's going to fit. So if you want to make sure you don't get two of the same fabrics next to themselves, you can always turn the blocks. It's pretty easy to get those colors sprinkled throughout. I want to show you something about when you put your 4 blocks together into this bigger block. Remember I mentioned that the seam allowances were not all going to nest. So sometimes, like right here, I flipped that one over, and right here, I flipped that one over as I was sewing these together because there was too much bulk right there, and I was having trouble getting everything to match. So I think it's important for these to match up. And when the seam allowances are nesting, it's pretty easy. When they're both going the same way, it's hard to get them to match up. It's not perfect there, it's pretty good there, it's pretty good there. The matching doesn't matter as much on these points, but I flipped some of these anyway so that it wasn't too bulky right there. So you can get very picky if you like and take things out right there and make them match better. That's close enough for me, but I just found that flipping some of those seam allowances as I came to them so that they did nest right here, they're going in different directions, made it a little bit easier to get it nice and matched. I've got the quilt all loaded on the machine and it's time to pick a thread color. I'm actually pretty sure that I will use one of the golds, but let's look at all the colors because once in a while when I reel them off, I do change my mind. This matches wonderfully well. It's a little dark in the light areas. This nice soft green, that might work. It actually blends in really well on the light. Rust, there's a lot of rust in all of the patches. It's a little bit dark for me in those light areas, and here's the 2 gold colors. So this is a lighter one. It's not going to show much in there. It's not going to show much in the prints. And then this one's just a little bit deeper. Neither one is going to show very much, but I do think I'm going to go with this lightest gold. For the quilting pattern, I have this beautiful one with all these different leaves, and I think that will look so good on this patchwork. The Buckeye Beauty quilt is all done. Very happy with how it turned out. I like that when you put all the blocks together, you see almost chains of patchwork going on the diagonals, and then where these 4 pieces come together, look at this little teeny patchwork you get here. I could never make that other than when we use the strip method to make these blocks. So that really enhances it to have that little teeny patchwork. The quilting is very nice. We've got all different shapes of leaves. We've got some swirls. Now the borders, I didn't show you how I did the borders, but the borders have some cornerstones on them. So all you do is make your whole patchwork quilt. You add a plain border to each side. Then you cut this exactly the width of your quilt. Actually, you cut 4 borders exactly the width of your quilt, and on the top and bottom you add these extra pieces. For the outside border, same process, but you put a little 4 patch in the corner. The quilt was actually so fast to make that I made a second one. This is the throw size, so it's 60 by 60. These are Christmas prints called Jingle Pop. They look really good too. And I've got the gold mixed in with the black and the red. and all those poinsettias. It's very vibrant. This would make a great blanket to put on the back of your couch for the whole holiday season. For me, I think that I like the fall quilt a little better. It might be partially because the backside has this awesome print with candles and pumpkins and leaves, but I'd be interested to know, which one do you like better? The Christmas version or the autumn version? Let me know in the comments. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'd like to show you how to make an all-in-a-row quilt, named because these fabrics are all in a row. It's from Pine Tree Country Quilts, and it uses yardage. So it uses differing amounts depending on how many flowers there are of each color. I've picked out these fabrics from Robert Kaufman, and these are called Painterly Petals. And they're very beautifully flowered. They do look like they were painted on there. So we'll pick some of these for the flowers, and this will go in the center of every flower, and then this and this pink will be accent little squares. Next, we need to pick a background color. We actually could do black as the background. That would be pretty dramatic, but I think I will like it better with a light background. So then my question is, solid white or bone? I don't often use a white. Bone is usually the choice I will go with, but I think there is actual white in this one, and there's some white in those, and I think that'll give a crisper look, so we'll go with our true white. Each fabric has a letter, and I've gone ahead and made some stickers for each one of these, so I will know how to cut them. I'm also going to cut a little scrap off of each one and tape or staple them to a piece of paper, so I have that to refer to when I'm making all the blocks. It's always a good idea to iron your fabric before you cut it. That will eliminate any wrinkles and make sure that your cutting will be accurate. I can't give you all the sizes of the pieces because it's not my pattern, but it is super simple to follow the instructions in the pattern. All of the cutting is done now. We're ready to start sewing. We're going to work with our first color block, which is A, and then we're going to draw on the back side of some of these background triangles. I'm going to draw a light diagonal line across the back of 3 of them. These are going to fit on 3 of the corners here, so I'm just going to line up the edges and stitch right along the drawn line or a little bit to that side of the drawn line. And the reason you go a little bit to the side is because we're going to flip this over and we want all these edges to match. So I usually check my first few, make sure they look like they're lining up there, and then I'm going to finger press this right now. You might want to take it to the ironing board and iron it first, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to finger press, and then I'm going to take another one of these and I'm going to put it onto this corner. Finger press or iron, trim off that extra. The reason we trim off the extra is because it reduces bulk. It makes the quilt easier to stitch the next pieces together and makes it not so heavy. Now we're going to put one more on a third corner here. And that is the basis for our flower blocks. We need to make 4 of these for each flower block. For these other 3 petal blocks, you can use other methods to get your squares on here. There's a tape product you can put on here that will make a line. When I run out of tape, I usually use a permanent marker and draw it on there. It doesn't permanently stay on my machine, but then I can start at the very tip here at the needle hole and put this corner on the drawn line and just stitch, and that will give you the same result. Also, I like to chain piece these, so I'm not going to cut that one off. I'm going to leave it there and put the next one up, stitch that on, and then I'm going to do the last one here. And this not only saves time, it also eliminates a lot of the long threads that you would get when you stop and start repeatedly. I left just a few stitches between there, so it's not good, the stitching won't come undone, but now we don't have long trails like we had here that might end up on the top of your quilt. And I always trim those off before I quilt them, but I like to save as many steps as I can. Before we can finish the first block, we need to make some strip sets. Let's take a pink strip, and it's going to go with a background. And we'll take a green strip, and it is also going to go with a background. All we have to do is line up the long edge there, stitch all the way down, and I like to make sure I don't stretch anything because it makes the patchwork more accurate. And for this strip set, I'm going to press the seam toward the green. So I like to open it up with my hands here, pull it apart, anchor a finger there, and then just draw my fingertip or my fingernail down the edge, and that makes the seam allowance go towards one side until I can get it to the ironing board. I made the pink strip unit the same way, but the seam allowance here is going toward the background. And even though they're finger pressed, I still like to iron them. So I usually smooth it out with a dry iron and then add some steam. Both the strip units get subcut to the same measurement. So I've just got them both lined up on my cutting board here. And I'm going to make all the slices at the same time. All we need now is 2 of the pink, 2 of the green, these 4 blocks, and 1 green center. 2 of the blocks get green on the top, and the other 2 blocks are going to get the pink on the top. And it fits exact, so all you have to do is line up the edge there. And the block that gets the pink on the top, we are going to press toward this bigger square here. We'll do that with both of those. And then these ones that get the green on the top, it goes on the same side, but we're going to press the seam allowance away from this big block. The reason I'm doing these in different directions is because when we get our blocks all done and we're ready to lay them out and sew them together, the seam allowances will nest instead of all going the same direction. What we have is 4 rectangles, and the greens are going to go on opposite corners and the pinks are going to go on opposite corners. So these squares are going to go all around the edges, and to get these together we've got a little hole in the middle, and that's where this piece is going to come in. To put all these together, we have to do a method called the partial seam method. So we're going to start by stitching this piece to this piece, but I'm not going to stitch the whole seam. I'm going to put them right sides together here, and I'm going to start about 1 inch from the top here, 3/4 or 1 inch from the top, with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and stitch down the edge there. So I've got the far edges lined up, and I'm just starting right in the middle there. And I'm going to press the seam allowance toward the center. I'm going to press towards the center every time. So you can still finger press it a little bit, but we've got a little flap, a little opening there. Now this piece will fit on there without having to sew any partial seams. So we'll put them right sides together and stitch this piece on. Press toward the green still. And this one will fit on. So it's pretty easy once you get going. Here's the last rectangle to add, and you can see because this seam isn't sewn all the way, we can just move this piece out of the way and sew this all the way down this edge. The last step is to finish up that partial seam we did. So I'm going to put them right sides together, and I find it easiest to flip it over. You can do it from either side, but I'm going to start at this edge here, line up the corners, and all you have to do is stitch down just beyond where you started stitching earlier, which is right here. Finger press the rest of that seam, and I will take this over and iron the whole block, but that's what the flower block looks like. So this is the basis for the whole quilt. So I'm going to go ahead and do this for all the rest of the colors. The blocks are done, and we're ready to lay out the quilt. I marked all my blocks. I kept my stickers on, so these are the A blocks, and then the pattern tells you which ones go where because they're all in a row, they're all lined up. So let's start with the A. They're going to make a nice diagonal line. And let's see, all the blocks face the same way. So we're going to have the green in this corner every time. Then this pink block, that's going to go right below the A blocks. And we're going to just keep putting them the same way. And you can start to see what's going to happen when we put all of these blocks together. We're going to get a little 4 patch in the corner here, with 2 greens and 2 pinks. Now we can really see that coming together there, and you can see the rows lining up. So I'm going to keep laying out the rest of the blocks. That's the last block. It's going to be very easy to sew these together. Because we ironed our seam allowances going different directions, they're all going to nest when we put them together. So this one's facing this way, that one's facing that way. It'll be real easy to make the rows and get them stitched up. And then we've got a couple borders, then we can get it loaded onto the quilting machine. The quilt is all loaded up, and we get to pick a quilting thread color now. I've got 4 choices here. They're all fairly light because I think a light one will look better. I don't often use a solid white, but I think it would work well. Even on the darkest ones, it's not going to show very much, and it won't show at all in the background. This light lavender, you know, it's not showing at all in the white either, and I do like the way that looks. Could go with pink. We've got quite a bit of pink in all the prints. Again, doesn't show much. Or a nice light blue. It shows a little bit. I think I'm going to go with the light lavender. Since the fabrics I'm using are called painterly petals, I thought I would like to do something with flowers on it for the quilting. So there's one whole row, and here's what it looks like, just one repeat. Nice, even flowers. The all-in-a-row quilt is done, and you can see they are in a row. We've got the pink one and we've got the blue one. All the fabrics are in rows. All the colors are in rows. I love the way the blocks turn out and then make this 4 patch here. I like how they look like they're spinning just a little bit. And the quilting, you can see the flowers here, but it's not so dark and stark that it's fighting against the patchwork. We've got this nice little border and another print for the binding, and then the back side, another Painterly Petals fabric. You can't really see the quilting, but that's okay because the print is just awesome. It turned out 53 by 63. It'd be very easy to make it bigger. You can just make more blocks. You could make double the blocks, turn it, put 2 of them together and have a queen size quilt. Even though the pattern is called all in a row, you do not have to line up the rows of colors. I made another one of the quilts here in Christmas fabrics, and I just placed all the blocks at random. The pattern calls for yardage, but each one of these flowers can be made, the dark part here, from a layer cake square. So I got these layer cake squares from a Christmas collection from Moda called Pine Valley, and I made some of the blocks. I took some other layer cake squares and made the patches that go here. So from a whole layer cake you could make the same size quilt that I made in the Painterly Petals. And I really like this done at random. And of course the fabrics in the Christmas prints, they're just awesome. Now if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pattern called Applejack. This is one from Basic Gray and it uses a jelly roll. I'm going to change up the colors a little bit. Instead of that gold background, I'm going to use a light background, and for those accents I'm going to use this bright green, and then for all of these parts I'm going to use this jelly roll from Moda called In Bloom. I believe this jelly roll has 42 strips in it, and we're going to need 35 for the pattern, and each strip makes an entire section here. So I'll use that, but I will for sure not be using these really light ones because they won't show up against the background. But I think we've got 35 from all of these pieces, and we can always, if we don't have quite 35, you do have the option of taking one of these and using some of your scraps. You could make this from several different greens. It wouldn't have to all be the same one. So let's go ahead and get these pieces cut out. Every strip gets cut out the exact same size. I can't give you those sizes because it's not my pattern. But all of Basic Gray's patterns are very easy to follow. And there's just a few little cuts we need to make here from each strip. Okay, I've got the jelly roll pieces cut, the background, the accent, and we're ready to prepare the first sewing step. What we're going to do is take some of these accent squares and we're going to draw a line right across the diagonal, and I like to use a light pencil for this. We're just going to put one accent on each of these, and they're going to go on opposite corners. So half are going to be going like that, and half are going to be going on the opposite corner. So they're mirror images. And all we do is line up the edges and sew along the line, or just a hair to the side of the line. And what we want is for when we fold it, we fold along that sewing line. We want all of those edges to meet up. And then we're just going to press it. I'll use the iron and trim off the excess. Once those are all done, we're ready to make our first block. So I'm going to grab one stack of the pieces here, 2 of each of these, so 2 lefties and 2 righties, and then we need 4 of these squares and 4 of these rectangles, and we'll take this to the machine. Here's how the pieces are going to be laid out. The big single piece goes in the middle of the block. Then the next largest one goes right on the top and bottom of that. Moving along to the next biggest piece goes there, and then the smallest piece, top and bottom. The corners, I'm calling these the corners, they're going to go like that and like that, so the accents are on the outside of the block. Then we're just going to fill in with these guys. This middle row doesn't have any pieces added to it. These pieces get a little piece added to each end, and then the last pieces get a square added to each end. All we have to do now is make all the rows and sew those rows together. All the seam allowances throughout the whole block will get pressed toward the dark color. All those rows are done. We've just got the very bottom row to do. All the rows are made. It's super easy to put them together because there's no intersections to match at all. So every row is exactly the same length. And all I'm going to do is finger press to one side. I'm going to press them all exactly the same way. And that makes it very easy to iron after we sew the blocks in finger press. And then that first block will be all the way done. There, I'll give it a nice steam pressing, and then I'm going to go ahead and make up the rest of the blocks. The blocks are all done, and the layout is super simple. All we're going to have to do is put every block facing exactly the same way with a little space between them so we can get the sashing and cornerstones. I'll have to trade the colors around a little bit, but we are going to have 5 rows up and 7 rows across. There, I may trade around the blocks a little bit. I can see that I've got 2 similar ones right there, but it's fairly balanced. Now, when you have a color that's drastically different, like this one, you might want to put that one in the center and the other one closer to the center, or you might want to do what I'm going to do, which is to put them in the far corners. Either way is fine. It's totally a matter of preference. The next step is to put in the cornerstones and sashing pieces. There's a cornerstone in the middle of each intersection here. And then we've got sashing in 2 sizes. We've got shorter sashing that is exactly the same size as the blocks. And then we've got longer sashing that is the same length as the blocks. That's the whole quilt laid out. Now, it's not necessary for you to lay out every row like this. We're going to make this in rows patchwork, sashing for the whole first row. The next row is going to be the small sashing cornerstones, small sashing cornerstones. So you could just make a bunch of those rows and lay those rows in place. You don't necessarily have to lay the whole quilt out. There are some borders to finish this off, and we've got a narrow border that's going to go on the top and bottom, and then the side border is just a little bit wider. And I think the pattern maker felt that the quilt would be a lot more balanced if we had just a little more width on the side, and I agree. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of this stitched up and get it loaded onto the quilting machine. One option for putting your rows together is to just put a pin in it, pin all these pieces so you know you have them in the right order. And I do like to take a picture with my phone of the whole quilt before I start sewing so that I will know that I don't have a row in upside down once the rows are done. Now, I often don't pin mine. I just pick up all the big blocks in order, stack them up, put a stack of sashing on my lap, and sew it together that way. But you need to do whatever works best for you. There's not a right or wrong method. There's just the best method for you, the one that makes you feel like you're not going to get them mixed up. The quilt is all loaded up and we need to pick a thread color. I'm going to have to use either white, green, lavender, purple. Any of these will probably look really nice. Now if we go with white, it's going to show quite a bit on those darker things, but doesn't look bad. I like this light green. That doesn't show much in the background and it'll probably blend a little better in the prints. Now this is interesting. This is going to show in the background somewhat. Not a lot. This one, again, it'll blend right into the background. We'll blend in there. This would be the most extreme option. You could do this. You could do some flowers. They would show up quite a bit in the light areas. And then I've got this green, which it's a little bit darker than the lime there, but blends in really well there. It's going to show some, I think I'm going to go with the green. We do have green as the accent color, and I think that will work the best. For the quilting pattern, I'm going to do one that's flowery because the fabric collection is called In Bloom, and this is called Star Flower. And I like how it's pointy. Let me make it a little bigger so you can see it. I really like this part of the leaves. Looks really cool. So that's what we're going to go with. I've got the Applejack quilt all done. This is a really fun quilt to make because, as you can see, remember each one of the jelly roll strips made one of these blocks. And I love that there's a whole block in one fabric. It really showcases it well. The little prints, the big prints, and the quilting doesn't show much here, shows a little bit more. You can see that nice flower in the dark areas, and I think that makes the quilt look good. On the back side, I used this large floral print, and you get a hint of the quilting because I used that light green thread, but it doesn't overwhelm the back there. We've got a nice dark green binding. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Now there's something I want to point out. I don't know if you noticed this, but when I made my blocks, I was using a bone colored solid. And then I cut the sashing and the borders at a different time, and they're actually a different color. So I noticed it once I started making this sashing that this is white and this is bone. And I thought, you know, it doesn't really bother me, but I just want to let you guys know everybody makes mistakes. And if it bothers you, you got to take it apart and start over with these with the correct color. But if it doesn't, go ahead and leave it. Now, if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'd like to show you how to make a quilt called Mod Flower Box. The pattern is from Robin Pickens and it comes in a small size or a big size. I'm going to make the big size, and one lovely thing about this pattern is you can use fat quarters, you can use charm squares, or you can use a layer cake. I've got a fat quarter bundle here, and then I've got a nice deep black for the background. So let's take a look at the pattern and get the cutting started so we can start sewing. The first step is to take a look at these flowers. We've got big flowers, small flowers, and leaves. So I'm going to separate my fat quarters. I think I will use those for the big flowers, and I'll use the pinker ones for the small flowers, and then we'll use these light and green ones for the leaves. I'm going to go ahead and get these cut up into squares. I can't give you all of the sizes for the cutting pieces because it's not my pattern, but the pattern is very easy to follow. I'm cutting more than one layer at a time. I think I've got 5 or 6 pieces here, and I'm comfortable cutting that many. You don't have to cut them in multiples. You can cut them one at a time. And I did iron up the fat quarters before I cut. I think that helps make the pieces come out more accurately. I've got all the pieces cut out, and now we're ready to start making our curved blocks. That's these ones here. The pattern includes a page that has a template for these curved pieces. Robin Pickens also recommends a Creative Grids ruler that you can use for a quarter circle. I like to use this template set here to make quarter circles. This is the 6-inch size Drunkard's Path template set. You can also use this to make a 4 3/4 inch block. And whether you use these, the template set she recommends, or the template page in here, they're all going to come out a little bit bigger than you need, and then we're going to trim them down to the exact size. Here's how we're going to make our curved blocks. We're going to take one of the background squares, and we're going to use this template. And I've got a little piece of this rough stuff. It's almost like sandpaper that is stuck to the template, and that keeps it from sliding around. So I'm going to put that down on the square, and I'm going to line up these little edges here with the edge of the square. And I'm going to use a little bit smaller cutter than I normally use. This is the 45mm rotary cutter, and it makes it a little bit easier to get around this curve. So I'm just holding this down real tight and then cutting this to the size I need and cutting off those little end pieces. The next step is to we want to either make little slits right where these slits are in the template, or you can make little marks. I need to sharpen my pencil to make them a little more clear, but if you can just make them a little bit, you can draw them on here after you move the template. The marks make it very easy to match this piece up with the next piece. So you can either mark every one of these, or you can make a little slit like this. So the slit is about 1/8 of an inch, and it's right on top of those marks. Either method works, marking or cutting little slits. You don't need to cut the slits to be able to sew this curve, but those can help you line up. Even from this side, if you pull it like this, see where those slits are? Those will help you match everything up. Next, I'm going to take one of these colorful squares, and I'm going to put it right side down on here, and I'm going to use this template. And so let's put this on top, lining up these outer edges, and I'm going to cut right around here. So again, I've got that little sandpapery piece there to help hold it in place, and I'm just going to cut the curve. And again, I'm going to make marks this time, but I'm going to use a pencil, and I'm making it pretty dark so that you can see what I'm doing when we get to the sewing machine. These are the 2 curved pieces that we need to stitch together, and they need to go right sides together. So that means we're going to put this one on top of here and stitch along the edge and move this as we go so the edges all meet up. And that's why these little marks are so useful. So start off by just lining up the top edge here. Slide it over to your machine and sew a 1/4 inch away. And I take a couple stitches and then I start moving this piece over that way and the bottom piece over that way. And these little marks will line up as you go. So I just take a few stitches, move it over a little, few stitches more, move it over a little. Now we all have a tendency to pull the top or the bottom as we go, and that's okay. It will stretch because it's along a curve. But because you've got those little marks there, you can see, oh, I've stretched the top a little, I need to stretch it less. And you just match everything up so that when these edges come over here where the needle is, you're a 1/4 inch away and the edges are all lined up. Now you might not be able to get it perfect. I can't, even though I've tried. Especially when you get to this far end, it's a little hard to get everything matched up because there's not much to hold on to. But this is what it looks like when you're done. And when we iron this, we're going to turn the seam allowance toward the color. We will iron it and we'll ease it back to square, and it's really pretty easy to sew. I'd like to show you one more that just has slits and not marks. So you can see the slits along the edge there, and I'm going to start the same way, lining up the top. And I can still see those slits to line them up. There's the slit in the black, there's the slit in the pink. And I'm just going to keep pulling the pink one that way and the black one that way, so they will line up along the edge as I go. It looks a lot harder than it is. It really isn't that difficult. And because we're going to trim these when we're all done, they do not have to be perfect. So you can see my edge here is not perfect. I have a little bit of extra black. But we're going to iron these and trim off these two sides, and we will get a nice square with a curve in it. To iron the block, I want to make it so that this edge is straight. I don't want that pulled way over or pulled way over that way. So I'm going to set it down on my board here and see if it looks pretty straight. And then I'm just going to pat this down with my iron a little bit and make sure the seam allowance is going toward the color. Go around the edge there, and now I'm going to look at this edge. It's curving up just a little bit, so I'm going to ease it down this way, straighten everything out the best I can, and then add a little steam. You might find it easier to press the seam allowances toward the edge. It doesn't matter, you can do it either way. I just found that it's a little bit easier to get it ironed with them pressing that way, but the pattern will work either way. The last step is to trim the block. We want to trim off the printed part, so I'm going to line up these two edges on my cutting board. This is a good time to check and see if you've got it square. If your edges don't line up on here, you might have to re-iron it so that it's a little bit more square. You can always ease it back into shape. So measure over from the black each time, and these get trimmed off to 4.5 inches. So see, you've got quite a bit there of play, so that if your block isn't perfect, trimming it like this, it's going to come out exactly 4.5 inches. And we've got 1/4 inch left on the black there, and that's going to be our seam allowance when we stitch these together, so then that will go down to nothing when we stitch it into the other blocks. So I'm going to go ahead and make all the rest of the curved blocks, and then we can move on. I've got all the curved pieces stitched up and trimmed, and now we're ready to work on some of the patchwork blocks. I want to work on this leaf one first. So we're going to take 2 of these, and then we cut some of our squares in half along the diagonal. So we need 4 of these, and I'm going to try to get a variety of colors. Let's get these 4, and we'll take them to the sewing machine. Let's see how this block goes together. we're going to have 2 curved blocks, catty corner, and then we're going to have a block here with a diagonal seam and a block here with a diagonal seam. And you can individually pick out all the colors from all of your blocks. I try to not worry about it too much. I think I might like this one turned around here. It's not going to matter that much, but you can pick what goes where if you like. So let's start by sewing these blocks together. And I'm just going to finger press it right now. You probably would want to iron these before you move on, but for demonstrating purposes that will work good enough. And then this one I will sew, and I will put the seam allowance going the opposite way. So this one's going that way. I'm going to put this one going the opposite way, because then we will have a little bit less bulk right here in the middle. All we have to do now is sew this one and sew this one, and then we only have to match one seam right there in the middle. I like to pull this one right over and leave them attached because it helps me make sure that I don't get anything turned the wrong way. And of course, when I open it, I'm going to double check and make sure, is that what it's supposed to look like? And it is. So I'm going to press this seam allowance to this side, and that one the opposite way. And it's probably a good idea to trim off these dog ears here. And you can do it now, or you can wait till after you've stitched the seam and then trim them both at the same time. Then when we open this up, it's starting to look like a leaf. The next block we want to make is this one right in the middle here. And mine is also pink colored. So we need 4 of these blocks. That looks pretty good like that. Now when you sew these together, if all of your seam allowances are going the same way, it's hard to get these matched. So let's take these over to the ironing board and I'll show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take 2 opposite ones and I'm going to turn the seam allowance so it's going away from the middle instead of toward the middle. It's pretty easy to do because they're already flat and square. So I'm going to hold it down with my iron, and I'm going to hold it here, and I'm just going to press that the other way, add a little steam, turn it over, and I'm going to do the same thing with this block here. And now we'll take these to the machine and we'll find that it's going to be a lot easier to match these intersections. I'm going to give it a little pressing and some steam. And you can see on the back side here, that seam allowance is away, that's towards the middle, so they're all opposite. And that makes it pretty easy to get these intersections matched. Now, this one isn't perfect. I'm not that much of a perfectionist, so that's okay with me. This one's really good. And keep in mind, when we stitch these to the other patchwork, we're going to stitch right along the edge there. So perhaps where I don't have it perfect won't show that much anyway. Okay, there's the circle block, the leaf block we did earlier, and I went ahead and made this block. So this has 4 curved corners, 4 printed blocks, and a solid black in the middle. And there's only one more block to make, and it starts out with this curved one in the middle of it. And then we've got 4 corners, And this is kind of fun because you can play with what fabric should go where. Because we've got a variety of fabrics here, and I try to balance it so the colors are balanced, but there's no right or wrong way to do this. I just start laying out the pieces and then see what do I like where. And then I'll trade around a little bit. And this block, pretty easy to sew together. We're going to sew these two guys together and then sew them on the sides of the center here. Make a long row on the top, a long row on the bottom, stitch those on, and then we're almost ready to lay the quilt out. The last block we need is what's called a pollen block. So we have a little dot of pollen here. So we're going to make a couple that are facing this way, and then we're going to make some that are facing the opposite way. Then we'll be ready to lay the quilt out. The quilt is made in quarters. Every quarter is exactly the same, but they'll be turned. So I've pulled off everything we need for 1/4. 1/4 is also the size of the wall hanging if you were making that size. So we've got this big piece over here, medium flower there. Then we've got some leaf blocks, one here and one here, far one up here. This circle goes right here. And then we've got some, these are the pollen blocks. So this one, let's see, this is going to go here. Another one goes here. And the pollen blocks, you know, we've got some one way, some the other. So you have to look and make sure you're putting the right one. Don't put this one here, put that one there, and then this last one goes up here. So you can see the pieces will all fit together once we've got it laid out, but there's a little bit of sashing that goes between some of these blocks. We've got these little skinny separators. So that's going to go between here. A long one here and a short one here. So all we have to do is make that side and make this side and then put it all together. I've got all 4 quarters done, and this is the fun part. We're going to just take this one and spin it 90 degrees, and then this one we will spin all the way around here, and then this one we can just turn this direction. So now you can see a little bit of what's going on in the middle here. And we've got sashing that goes between and a cornerstone. The sashing is all the same color as the background. So the sashing, it's all black. But the cornerstone that goes in the middle, we've got choices. So there were a lot of extra squares left from when I cut all the patchwork. So you can lay this out, and then we can pick what color do we want to go in the middle there. Let me get the last piece of sashing here. So we can decide, do we want purple? That looks pretty good. Oh, I like the blue a lot. Or you could even go with the pink to bring in the flower colors. I don't know. I like the blue. I think I'll go with the blue because I like the way it brings in these leaf colors. Once this is all put together, there's another black border that goes around it. Then we've got 2 more borders, which will probably be from some of the prints. And then I'll get it loaded onto the quilting machine. The quilt is loaded up and we're ready to pick a thread color. There's so many options that would really look good. I think I'm going to have a hard time picking. I first thought for sure I would use this kind of a lilac color because it blends in very well there. We won't see it in the prints at all. So that's one option. This would brighten things up a little bit. It's a nice bright green, and that's going to show a little bit more in there, but I don't think it will hurt it. We've got a dark blue. This one will probably show the least. We'll just get a hint of color. Bright pink here. Let's see what that looks like. It will show, doesn't fight with it. My last option is this variegated. So variegated, it's going to be different colors depending on where it is in the quilting. And it looks bright here, but when I put it on the quilt, I think that one actually blends very nicely. So let's go with the variegated. I'm going to quilt with a pattern called sticky buns. It always makes me hungry every time I use this pattern because it looks a little bit like cinnamon rolls. But I like all those swirls, and it's got a little bit of abstract wiggly things between, and that'll look good on this pattern. Here's the finished mod flower box quilt. It is kind of mod looking. It's very geometric, even though we've got those rounded pieces. And I just love the balance of it. I love all the leaves in the middle, and then it's more colorful towards the outside. The quilting with the variegated thread, I really like it. It isn't too strong that the patchwork doesn't show, but I just love all those different colors showing. I love the swirls. We've got this nice printed border here, and I thought that having a different binding would take away from it, so I just did black. And then we've got a nice flowery print on the back side. It turned out 78 by 78, so it's a nice, generous throw size. The pattern was so much fun to make that I decided to make the wall hanging size as well. This is also included in the pattern. It's just 1/4 with the borders around it. This is made with Robin Pickens fabrics called Winterly. And we've got red, black, green, the circles. Now, here's something. There's different color backgrounds. They don't show up quite as much as I would have thought, but the pattern shows you to make this quilt with all one background, like I did on my big quilt, or with the two different colors here. It's just a little hint of color. The one thing I might do differently if I make it again is the round block here was done with the lights because I made it from charm squares, and this is what the charm squares included. And so this one doesn't show up quite as much as I would have liked, but next time I make it, I'll put some of these in the middle. I'll cut some of the border fabric, couple extra squares, and mix it in. So that's just hindsight. If you make a quilt and you have a light block like this, don't point it out to people. I'm only showing you because I want you to have the benefit of my little mistakes or my design irregularities, so when you make it, you'll be happy with yours. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make a panel project. It's called Autumn in Flight, and we've got this nice panel with trees on the pattern, but I'm going to make it with this beautiful reindeer here. The panel is from Blank Quilting, from a collection called Holiday Style, and this is a common size panel. It's about 24 inches, and so I always start all my projects by ironing the panel up nice and flat and square, and then we're going to trim it down to size. I need to trim it to 21.5 inches. It's about 24.5 right now. So that's about 3 inches bigger than we need. So I'm going to cut off about 1.5 inches. So what I'm going to do is line this up on the half inch in from the edge of the panel there, and I'm going to trim it here, and then I'm going to measure over 21.5 inches. So we're cutting off the border, and we're cutting off a little teeny bit of the panel, but not much. And we're going to add a border around here after we trim it. For the length, we need to trim it to 37.5. So I've got it folded in half, so I'm measuring over from the fold 18 3/4 inches. And it's only cutting off a little bit of the panel. And here's what it looks like now. It just looks a little empty without that plaid border. But our next step is to add a border, and we have this plaid, so that's what I'm going to put on first. What I'm going to use around the edges here, I'm going to use a solid white here, and then that gray plaid will go here and here, and it's a little bit in the patchwork there, and then I'm going to add this black snowflake and this red poinsettia print. The pattern from Pine Tree Country Quilts is very easy to follow, and it's not my pattern, so I can't give you all the cutting sizes, but you'll have no problem getting the pieces you need by following the easy instructions. That is all the cutting we need to do. The first thing we're going to sew is we're going to make a strip set. We're going to use 2 of these, 1 on each side of this black one, and then we're going to use 2 of these plaid grays on the outside there. So let's take these over to the sewing machine. To make a strip set with 5 strips like this, you just want to be careful to not stretch any of your strips. I've made a lot of these, so I tend to not stretch them. If you think you might, then you can just pin it all the way along here before you get started, and that way you won't get the top or the bottom going into the machine faster, because if you do, it will make your strip set a little bit wonky. Some people like to stitch down with the first strip and stitch up on the second strip, and you can do that, but honestly, if you can just keep from stretching, your strip set will lay nice and flat. So I'm not stretching the top or the bottom. I'm also not stretching this. See, you can pull this and it'll get ironed back out when you go to the ironing board. But it's just easier if you keep everything flat and not stretched. I like to finger press the seam as I go. So before I sew the rest of the strips on, I'm going to pull this open a little bit, anchor it with my finger there, and then pull my fingernail or even the pad of my finger right down this seam. And I'm not pulling it so hard that I'm stretching it, I'm just squashing it down, and this tends to keep that all the way open so there's no valley in there, and it'll keep it open until we get to the ironing board. It makes it very stable. So just a quick finger press, and then I will go ahead and add all the rest of the pieces, finger pressing as I go. Even though we finger pressed it and it's pretty flat, I like to put it on the ironing board here, smooth it out, make sure it's straight, and then press it. I usually use a dry iron first, Make sure it feels like it's all the way flat, and then I'll add some steam. Next, we can cut this. We're going to cut it into sections. So I like to line it up on my cutting board so I know these cuts will be perpendicular to the edge. And we're going to cut 3.5-inch sections throughout the whole strip. We're going to use these sections along with these plain blocks to make flying geese units. So for each flying geese unit, that's going to be the background. We're going to need 2 squares, and I'm going to draw a line right along the diagonal here. So I'm just using a pencil and making a light line. We'll make one that way, and then we'll do that on a second square, and we'll take these 3 pieces to the machine. The first piece, it fits exactly on here, on these 3 edges, so line them up and stitch either right on the line or a smidge over on that side. The reason we go over a teensy bit is because we're going to fold the top fabric over on itself, and it doesn't fold like a piece of paper. Fabric has a little bit of bulk to it, so when we fold this over, we want all of these edges to meet, and so that's why it helps if you scooch it over a tiny bit. Normally I would iron this first, but I just finger pressed it. We want to trim away the back 2 layers here, leaving a 1/4-inch seam. The second piece goes on shaped like this, and I find it easiest to stitch in this direction. So I'm going to line everything up and make that second seam. And I always like to fold it over and check and make sure my sewing is accurate, which it looks pretty good here. And then we will trim off this side. And look at what a cool flying geese block this made. It's got all those different fabrics in it. So I've got to make multiples of these, so I'm going to go ahead and get those stitched up. All the flying geese blocks are done, and we're going to make some rows with these. We're going to make some borders. So the first one has 5 flying geese facing this way. Then we've got 1 row with some background pieces and 3 flying geese, and 1 row that just has 1. These 3 rows all get stitched together. It's pretty easy. There's hardly any matching at all, just a little bit here and here. Then all we have to do is add a small border here, which will fit after our seam allowances have been sewn, and a longer border on this end, and then that row will be done. We've got everything we need to lay out the pieces around the panel. We've got a couple of borders that go around here, and these are cut to the exact length that we need. They'll be real easy to stitch on. Remember, when you have a very narrow piece of patchwork, to be extra careful and extra accurate, because it shows more if you're not accurate. On the smaller the piece is, the more the imperfections will show. But they're straight pieces, it's pretty easy to get it on. Then the top and bottom, these will then be the right length. Then we're going to put the top and bottom borders on. So the bottom border, this piece one, is going to go here. The top one pointing the other way. And after we put those on, the side borders go on. So this one's going to go on here, and the other one here. And the last thing we're going to put on is an outside border in this same gray plaid. That will frame it very nicely. So this will be really easy to get stitched up, and then I can get it loaded onto the quilting machine. The quilt is all loaded up, and we need to pick a thread color. I've got quite a bit of what we call negative space here. these big white areas. So we could use a contrasting color thread and the quilting would show quite nicely. So I've got red. This is a pretty dark red, matches in there. It's going to show up a lot. We also could use white. Now this probably won't show at all, but of course, since we're using a solid here, the indentations, the textures will show. This is actually pink, but we've got kind of a corally pink there, and this is a little bit lighter than that red. Then I've got two shades of gray. So we've got the gray, dark gray, and silver. Not going to show much, but it's going to show a little. I really think that this silver one will look the best. For the quilting pattern, I'm using one called Garden. The prints around the deer, they have some flowers. So let me show you this a little bit bigger. There's a couple flowers, there's a couple stylized, abstract, leafy things here. And I think this is just going to look really nice. It's a very interesting pattern. It'll make a nice quilting pattern. I've got the Autumn in Flight panel quilt all done, and even though mine does not have an autumn theme, the flying geese, they still look like they're flying, so that's where the in flight comes into play. I'm very happy with the quilting. I love these stylized flowers here because it kind of matches the flowers we've got here with the little balls. The deer looks great. I like the way there's patchwork up there and down here. Borders, binding, it just turned out really nice. I used a coordinating print on the back side, and it is kind of Christmassy, but you could use it throughout the whole winter. Just a beautiful, fun project, and it really didn't take much time at all. This is really something you can get done in just a couple of days. Now, if you like our videos and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today, I'd like to make the pattern called Kitty Kitty. I've been looking at this for a long time because I like the blue colors there, and I like those diagonal chains of patchwork. And this one is all a color theme. It's beautiful, but I want to make one that's got more colors in it. So I'm going to use the jelly roll from Kaufman called Dotted. And so we've got all these different bright colors in it. The pattern calls for 40 2.5-inch strips, and we've got different colors specified here and quantities of strips you need. So mine will be a little bit different than that, but let's see what we've got here. I think we have some clear color groups that we can use, even if they're not all individual colors that we're going to use. So I think we need 12, 12, 8, and 8. So if we start at the purple blue end here, we've got 12 of these, and then we've got, I think we'll stick these here, I think we've got 8 green ones, and then we've got 12 dark ones and 8 orange ones. Here's what we've got. These two color stacks here, they will be where we've got light and dark blue there. Then these colorful pieces here, darker, they will be making all of these chains and also the middle patchwork there. The only other fabric we need is some background. There's a couple of borders, but I'll pick those out later. And the background, that's the only fabric we have to cut up, because the strips are all going to be used whole to make strip sets with. Now I can't give you the sizes of all of the background pieces because it's not my pattern, but it's a cozy quilt pattern and they're always so easy to follow. We have everything we need cut, and now we can start sewing. First step, we're going to take 4 of these blue strips and 4 of the background strips, and we're going to make a strip set, one of these and one of these. Then we're going to do the same thing with some from this stack. All we have to do is take one background strip and one of the jelly roll strips and sew down one long edge. And the only thing I'm careful of here is that I don't stretch the top or stretch the back, because that makes the strip set a little bit wonky. So if you don't stretch, stitch all the way down. That's all there is to it. I like to finger press the seam. So I'm going to open this up, and I want the seam allowance to go toward the dark. So I'm going to kind of pull it open with the palms, with my palms and my thumbs there, and then anchor it with this finger, and then pull your other finger right down that seam. And that will flatten it out. I'm not really stretching it, I'm just squashing it. And then when we take it over to the ironing board, that seam allowance wants to stay that way, and it'll be really quick to iron it. Even though these were finger pressed, you still want to iron them. And I like to lay it out on my board so that it's parallel to the edge, so I know it's not distorted. And then I usually just do a dry iron and then add some steam. The next step is to make some subcuts with these. The way I like to do that is to we'll take 2 different colors. We'll put this one with this and this one with that, because these are going to end up as 4 patches. And I'm going to put them right sides together right now. And I'm going to match up the seam in the middle. It doesn't have to be perfect because we're going to have to readjust it after we cut. And I'm going to line it up on a line on my table. Let me slide it down here. And then I'm going to make my subcuts, and then my pieces will already be facing the right way so that we can stitch them together. Let me show you what I mean. I've got this one, and this one, and it may move a little on the way over to the sewing machine, but basically we're going to stitch right here, open it up, and we're going to get a nice 4 patch. All we have to do is make sure that intersection is lined up there. Seam allowances are going in opposite directions, and I like to put it on the machine so that the back here has the seam allowance going down, because then it doesn't tend to get flipped up as I sew. I'm going to sew all of them exactly like this. And you'll notice, because the strips I cut are 2.5 inches without the pinked edge. Kaufman's pre-cuts are cut a little bit wider than 2.5 inches because they're measuring from the inside edge of the pink cut. I just ignore it. Honestly, by the time we get the blocks done, that's sticking off a little teeny bit there. It's not going to bother us at all. So I'm again going to finger press, hold it open, and just give a little press like that, and it makes it much, much easier to iron it. You can see how easy these are to iron because we finger pressed. Pretty much you're just going to have to make sure it's flat, give it a little bit of steam. I'm going to do the exact same thing we did with these 4 patches, with these strips here. And then I'm going to take some that don't have a background. They're just going to have 2 strips. Sew them together and make more 4 patches. There's the last of those 4 patches. Now we're going to take all of these 2 stacks, and we're going to take one from each stack and sew them together into a strip unit. These strip sets get cut a little bit bigger. And we don't have to do any more stitching to these. All we do is cut them like this, and then we will add a few corners, but we don't make these into 4 patches. To create the point on this block, the most exact way to do it is to draw on the diagonal of your background blocks. So each of the squares below get 2 of these, and then you can stitch these on, one on each corner, and it'll make a little point. Now, if you don't want to draw on the back of them, you can put a line on your sewing machine. There's tapes you can use, whatever method you prefer. It doesn't matter which corner you start on. I'm going to start on this edge, line up those raw edges, and stitch just a little bit to that side of that drawn line. And that way, when you go to fold it, it should fit just perfectly. So when we fold this over, all of our raw edges are meeting along here. I'm going to trim this off with scissors right now. You can take it to the cutting board and use your blade if you like. And then we'll put that second half on. So what we're doing is we're making blocks that have a little point. And all the blocks have 2 different colors. So in my case, my blocks had green, and then over here they have yellow or orange. So it's important to put this point so that all your blocks are facing the same way. So the next block, make it pointed like this. Don't turn it around. Put it with green always on this side. And that way the quilt blocks will have a little more balance. I've got 4 of the blocks we just made, along with some of the blocks we made earlier. This is the center of our block. Then we're going to put 4 of these around the edges, and I just picked 4 different ones, and I think I will balance the colors a little more. Put my yellowy ones here and my orangey ones there. Then we've got these 2 different stacks of things we made earlier, and we're going to put these in the opposite corners. That one there, and that one there. And all we have to do is make these 3 rows and sew the rows together. And I'm going to press the seams on this row away from the middle. And I'll do that same direction on the bottom row. And then this middle row, the seams will go toward the center. And that way, when we go to put the rows together, everything will lay nice and flat. That is block number 1, and we've got 15 blocks that are made just like this. The first block, they're all completed. Now we're ready to move on to the second block. We have to make strip sets for these also. These strip sets are a little bit different. We're going to make 3 strips here with a jelly roll strip in the middle, and then we're going to make some strip sets that have these wider pieces and just 1 jelly roll piece on one end. I went ahead and made all of these strip sets. They're all ironed, and they all get cut exactly the same way. So you can stack some, you can even put them one above another on your table. Just make sure that you've got them lined up on a line. And then we're going to do subcutting. and they all get cut 2.5 inches wide. Once everything is cut into segments, we have a very easy block to make. This will go in the middle. We'll do one of these on one end and just pick a different color for the other end. And we will sew these together. So we're going to use all of this color group to make blocks like this. And then we'll use our other color group, which is over here. Same thing, all made into that shaped block. So I've got 2 of each kind of square. And we are going to set them like this. So we're going to get 4 different colors in the middle, and all we have to do is stitch this way and then stitch that way. I'll go ahead and stitch up the rest of these blocks, and then we'll be ready to lay the quilt out. The layout is super simple. We just alternate the squares. So I've got them facing with my one color here. I've got that same color on this diagonal going that direction. So keep all of your blocks facing like that. I'm not going to spin them. I'm just going to do every other one. Now we get a great picture of what the whole quilt is going to look like. Very easy to stitch together from here. Just make the rows, stitch those rows together, and I think there's 2 borders that we'll add, and then we'll get it loaded onto the quilting machine. I've got the quilt loaded on the machine, and we need to pick some thread. I've got 2 soft options and 2 brighter options. Let's see what they look like. These are always fun, these variegated threads. So you never know what color will end up where. It will show in the background. I don't think it'll show at all in the patchwork there. This is nice and cheerful. That's also going to show even in the light areas. It won't be real prominent, but it'll show a little bit. This soft lavender picks up a lot of the colors that are in there. That's not going to show at all there. Also not going to show much in the patchwork. There's a lot of blue in it. Blue would be good. A hint of color there. I think I'm going to go with the least prominent thread today, which is the lavender. For the quilting pattern, I'm using this one called Bubbles. I love all the circles, big and little, and the pattern, the jelly roll we used, it's called Dotty, and it's filled with circles and dots, so this should be perfect. The Kitty Kitty quilt, it's all done, and it's nice and bright, and I love how balanced the colors are. Mine is multicolored, where the pattern showed it 2 colors of blue here, a green, and a yellow. So mine is more multicolored, but every block has the green 4 times in the same spot. And that makes it look even and very, very balanced. Same with these diagonal lines. Clearly this one has one color, the other diagonal has another color. Turned out really nice, and these swirly quilting called Bubbles matches all these dots so nicely. There's a 2.5 inch border and a 4.5 inch border, and I did the back with these striped bubbles and the binding with the same color. The quilt turns out 72 by 84, which is a nice big throw size. It'd be pretty easy to make it bigger. Add more jelly roll strips. There's just those 2 blocks, so you can hardly see the blocks now. So this is the first block we made right here, and then that's the second block. And they're just alternated, so super easy to make it larger. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'd like to show you how to make the quilt called Serenity. I've been wanting to make this for a long time. I really like quilts that don't have a lot of different colors in them because there's places to use these in your house. Sometimes you want a spot of red on a couch on the end of your bed. But I think instead of the red, I think I'm going to do it with a darker group, and I think I'm going to do it with less contrast. So I'm going to pick the darker ones out of here, and instead of having light and dark, like we've got light and dark red, I'm going to do it mostly all darker colors. This is a pattern from Cozy Quilt Designs, and something I really like about their patterns is that they offer a lot of different sizes in one pattern. I'm going to make the throw size today. So I have options. I can either use 14 fat quarters, or I can use a mix, some fat quarters and some 2.5-inch strips. You could even use charm squares and 2.5-inch strips, or some charm squares and some fat quarters. So this would also be a great pattern if you want to use up some of your scraps, some of your pre-cut pieces that you have left over from other projects. I'm using a fat quarter bundle of batiks called Fresh Meadow, and I only need 14 of them. I think I've got 20 here. So I'm going to pick out some that have some different colors. They're not all the same color, but I think I will not use these lighter ones. So I'm going to have a lot less contrast built into the quilt, but there will be blue, green, purple, my favorite colors. These are all the fat quarters I've selected, and I actually picked out 15. So just because a pattern calls for 14 doesn't mean you can't use 15 or 16 or 17 if you want to blend in a little more color. Before I cut, I always iron to get the fabric nice and flat, and then my cutting will end up more accurate. I'm going to lay each of my fat quarter pieces so that the selvage is up against my stomach here and the half width of the fabric is up here. So it's a little bit narrower this way than that way. And you have to be a little bit careful when you cut these because we're going to use up quite a bit of the width. There's several different sizes we're going to be cutting here. I can't give you all the sizes because it's not my pattern, but Cozy always has such easy directions to follow. You will have no problem getting everything cut to the exact sizes you need. These are all the pieces we need for the whole quilt. And to make the first block, we need one long one. Then we're going to need 4 different squares. We'll use those 4. And then we're going to need 2 of these rectangles. So I'm just going to pick out some that I haven't picked already. So each square will have all these different pieces. The block layout is super easy. We're going to have 2 pieces up here, long piece in the middle. Then we're going to have 2 more pieces here, another piece in the middle, and then the very long piece will fit on the bottom. Once we sew these together, this will be exactly the right length. So let's start with the top row here. If you want to know what's the right and wrong side on your batik, it's sometimes hard to tell. Usually, if there's dark speckly things, like this, that's the wrong side. Now, if you have to look for a long time and you can't tell, then it really doesn't matter. But on this one, that's clearly the back side of the fabric. I'm going to finger press the seam allowances. And for the top row, I'm going to press every one to that side. So I'm just going to press it down a little bit with my fingers. And once the block is all done, we'll take it to the ironing board and steam press it nice and flat. Next row, same procedure, but we will finger press all the seam allowances in the opposite direction. Now we just have to sew all these three together. So because we finger pressed in opposite directions here, it's real easy to get the intersections to match because they will nest. We'll press this seam allowance down. And we can add our last piece. So that is the whole quilt. Every quilt is going to be a block just like this. So I'm going to go ahead and pick out a variety of colors for each block and make all my blocks and get them all pressed nice and flat. I've got all the blocks done and the layout is super easy. We're going to take the long strip here and put it on the bottom, and then the next one in this row, that long strip goes on the top. So I'm going to keep alternating like this. And as I usually do, I don't worry about the colors when I first lay them out. I just try to get the blocks laying the correct way. Now for the second row, we're going to put the long strip on the side. So let's start with this one on the right. The next one goes on the left. And we keep alternating this row, right, left, right, left. The third row, it's exactly the same as the first row. So we've got the long strip on the bottom. The next one will go on the top. And I'm just going to keep laying it out till the quilt is done and then balance the colors. That's the last block there. Now, I didn't look at the colors at all. I simply laid them out in the direction they should go. And the only trading I'm going to do, because it looks pretty balanced, is where I've got the same fabric or really close fabrics right up next to themselves. So this is the same fabric here. I'm going to trade this with another block. Also, when I stand back, the fabrics that stick out a little bit more than the others, the dark purple does a little, and I think we might need some here. And then this light lavender, I want to make sure it's balanced as well. So I'll do a little bit of trading, get the block sewn together, get it onto the quilting machine. I've got the quilt all loaded up, and now we get to pick a thread color. I'm using a darker color here because I think a light one will show up too much. So any of these will work. Let's see, if you want a little more purple showing. I honestly don't think it's going to make any difference which one of these we use. That's a little bit lighter. It's going to show a little bit there. I've got a nice blue on the back. A lot of blue in here. A little bit dark. I think this will be the best choice. Let's see what it looks like. Yeah, it's not going to show up much. We'll use this one. For the quilting pattern, I'm doing one called Scribbles. This is nice and flowy. I don't use it very often because sometimes it looks a little young to me. But a lot of people like this simple kind of pattern that just keeps going, and I think it'll look really good on our dark patchwork. I've got the Serenity quilt all done, and I'm very happy with the color mix. I like it all with less contrast of colors. There is some contrast, but there's not a strong secondary pattern in this that shows up when you make the quilt anyway. So that's why I liked a blend of fabrics that were all medium and dark. I made the 55 by 66 inch size. You could make it all the way up to a king. You could add borders. This is a quilt that I think looks great without borders, and it'd be super easy to make it bigger. I only used 14 fat quarters. Well, that's what the pattern called for. I added in 1 or 2 more so I would have more variety of print. And here's that fun swirly pattern. It's an all over. It just fills in the batik nice. It doesn't fight with anything. And then I used this nice blue fern that matches the top so well. Same thing for the binding. Really fun, really fast. One of the fastest quilts I've made. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'd like to show you how to make the pattern called Cosmic Jewels Revisited. This is a pattern from Debbie Maddie, and she wrote this some years ago, and then she updated it so that actually, no matter what size you make, the pattern's going to look the same. So it's got 4 sizes, and each size has bigger patchwork, and that's why the pattern will look the same no matter which version you're using. I'm going to make the throw size, and that calls for fat quarters. I'm going to use these variety of grunge fat quarters, and this bundle has 12 different colors. I only need 8 for the patchwork, so I'm going to pick out the 8 I like best, and I'll use the other ones on a border or even on the binding. These 8 should be perfect. So what we've got for the lap, we need 8 fat quarters, then we need a background. I'm going to use this grunge, which has a little bit of gray and white in the background, and this is color pearl. And I like it because there's a little bit going on. It's not a solid. Then we're going to have a little border. We're going to have an outside border, backing binding, but I'm going to pick out the outside border, even the inside, once I get all the patchwork done. Each of the fat quarters gets cut exactly the same way. I can't give you the sizes because it's not my pattern, but Debbie Maddie's patterns are always extremely easy to follow. Now we need some background. There's only a couple different sizes to cut. There, the cutting is all done, and it was very simple. The next step is to make yourself a little color chart. You need to label each fabric. So this is going to be number 1, 2, 3, 4, and all I did was staple a little piece of fabric on this paper, and this way we can refer to this because we're going to be making half square triangles, and we're going to be combining some of the colors, and then we will use this chart also when we go to lay out the quilt on the table. This is the background. The next step is to make some half square triangles. The pattern is going to tell you which of the colors you need. So I need number 1 and number 2, and the pattern will tell you how many to make. So for half square triangles, we're just going to draw along the back side of the light fabric, right on the diagonal. Half square triangles are pretty easy. We use them in a lot of quilt making. And all you do is line up all the outside edges and then stitch 1/4 inch away from that center line. Now slice right across the middle here, and you can use scissors if you prefer. And then we're going to press the seam allowances toward the darker color. The way I like to do this is to put the light color down on the ironing board and then peel this open. And I'm trying to make sure that it's open all the way along the seam and it's straight and I'm not getting a bow or an arc there. And then I usually use a dry iron and then add a little steam. The last step is to trim off these little triangles, we call them dog ears, and that reduces the bulk and makes it easier for the quilt to lay flat. So we need a few different color combinations to make half square triangles with, but the steps are all the same. There's either going to be two different colored ones or a colored one and a background. So I'm going to go ahead and get all the rest of the half square triangles done. I've got all of my half square triangles done, and now we're ready to lay out the quilt. There's a nice diagram in the quilt, so all you have to do is follow whatever it says. So if we are going to be using a 1 and 2 or a 2 and 3, it'll tell us exactly where to place all of those squares. What you might want to do is stack them all up, because some only have a few, but some have a lot. And you might want to make some stickers. So this is a 5, 4. You could do a 5, 4 like that. And this will come off the table here, but you might just make, you can put it on the top and then pull off the bottom. You could label all of these and that might help you with your layout. We're actually going to lay the whole quilt out. We will be sewing it in several sections, but we're going to lay out the whole quilt. So I'm going to start on the bottom row. This is the whole bottom row of the quilt. And you'll notice we added some background squares. There's a background rectangle over here. And then there's a big background piece. And so as we fill in the rows, they will then match up with the top of that. So I'm going to keep laying out and we'll see what the quilt looks like. There we go. This is half of the quilt all laid out. Now I thought that perhaps I could make one half and then make the second half and it might be a mirror image, but it's not. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the rest of the pieces out so we can see where they all go. Those are the last few pieces. What I do next is check to make sure that all of the colors are making diamonds. That way you'll know for sure you won't have a piece turned. And it's a lot easier just to check all of this visually or even take a picture than to go back to the chart and check each one. Do I have it turned right? The quilt will be made in sections, so I left a little space here so you can see it. We'll be making a rectangle up there. You actually can make that whole one there. And you've got this guy, which looks too small right now, but once we do all those seam allowances, it'll fit perfectly. And the pattern shows you which sections you can make these in. I would highly recommend using your color chart that we made with the numbers here. But then the labels made it go much faster. So I stuck those labels on each stack and I was able to find the colors much more quickly than saying, okay, I need a 3, 4, searching through the triangles to see which one was the 3, 4. I labeled them, I put them in order, 1B, 2B, 3B, 4B, 5B. I have missing ones because I used up all of some. But that made the layout go really fast and really easy. So I'm going to get everything sewed up. There are going to be some borders added, then we'll get it loaded onto the quilting machine. The quilt is all loaded up and I'm going to pick a thread color, and this time I'm going to use a darker color. I really would like to fill in some of this background with the thread. So we've got extreme options. This nice dark purple, really going to show. Got a light blue, and there's so many colors in the quilt top. Honestly, any of these are going to work for what I'm trying to do, which is make it show up. I still think the dark one there might be too dark. That would look nice. Nice deep burgundy purple here. There we go. Pretty dark. I think I'm going to go with this blue. For the quilting pattern, I'm doing one called Modern Ties, and I like these long ovals. I think that curviness against the diamonds we've got in the patchwork will make a nice contrast. I've got the Cosmic Jewels quilt all done. I am very happy with how it came out. I love the size. I also love the fact that if you get the pattern in different sizes, it'll be this exact same layout, but the pieces are bigger, and that's how the quilt is made bigger. I do like this swirly quilting. I love the way it fills up the background here. It looks great on the border. Now for the backing, I used another grunge. It's kind of a green blue, and you can really see the quilting there. Green background, blue thread. It shows up very nicely. Looks good on this little black border. And of course you could put any color border on. So if you like to bring out more of the blue, put a blue border on. For the binding, I just took the extra fat quarters that came in the bundle, and we had a little bit left of each of these grunges, and I cut them all up, and I just used 20-inch pieces and made a pieced border, a pieced binding all the way around, and I think that brings the colors out very nicely. Now remember when we were laying out the quilt and I had my little diagram with my stickers and the numbers? It really only took about 10 minutes to lay the whole quilt out. So I don't want you to be intimidated or think, ooh, that looks complex. It really isn't. It was very, very easy, and so easy to get all the patchwork quilt up, all the patchwork sewn up. It's just a nice throw size quilt you could use on your couch, or this would actually make a really nice wall hanging size too. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'm going to show you how to make a quilt called Side Steps. This is a pattern from Cozy Quilt Designs, and I'm going to make it a little bit different than what the cover shows. I'm going to use all these floral prints. This is a roll-up from Robert Kaufman called Georgina. So I'm going to use these darker ones in the darker section here, the lighter ones in the lighter section, and then I'm going to use a bone colored background, so that should change the look of this quite a bit. One of the things I love about Cozy's patterns is that they come in multiple sizes. We've got a table runner all the way up to a king. I'm going to make the throw size, so I'm going to need a total of 20 strips, 10 light, 10 dark. So those are for the different blocks here. You can see the darker one here, the lighter one here. So let's open up the jelly roll and see what will look good where. I think we have pretty distinct colors here, so it'll be easy to pick out what goes where. Yeah, okay, these are clearly dark, as are these here, so we'll pick 10 from those guys. Now for lights, these are all light, but I think I'm going to stick to light lavender and light green. We'll pick 10 of those. And then these leftover ones, which all have a cream background, we'll use these for one of the borders. There, 10 darks, 10 lights. Some of these will stay whole and we'll make strip units with them. Some will get subcut. I can't give you all the sizes because it's not my pattern, but Cozy Quilt's patterns are very easy to follow. The only other thing we need is some background. I'm going to use a nice solid bone. I like to use a weight when I'm cutting my fabric. So I've got a little 5-pound dumbbell here. That will help hold my ruler in place while I cut. It's almost like an extra hand holding up there. And it helps prevent that from sliding as you cut. The cutting is all done now, and we're ready to make some strip units. So we're going to take these whole strips and we're going to cut them in half along the fold here, so we have half strips. Then we're going to mix them up a little bit, and we're going to take 2 different ones and make strip units. So we'll take one of these and one of these, and we'll stitch them together side by side. All we have to do is stitch down one long edge, and I just try to make sure that I'm not stretching the top or the bottom or stretching the whole thing when I sew. And this will be much easier to iron if we finger press it. So to finger press, I've got my seam allowance going that way, and I'm going to pull it open, and I'm going to anchor it here with one finger. Then I'm just going to draw my fingernail or the pad of my finger right down that seam, and I'm just pressing it with my finger. And I can feel that the seam allowances are all going to that direction. It's just a quick pressing, but it'll make it very easy to iron flat. Now we can give it a very quick pressing. I like to do a dry iron first, make sure it's nice and flat, and then add some steam. Then this will get subcut, and we'll have some little segments that are already pieced that look like that. There's all of the dark little strip units. I'm going to do the same thing with the lights. So I've split them up, and then I'm just going to take these two, and then we'll do those two and those two, and make strip units exactly the same way as we did with the darks. There's all of those guys. Those are done, and we are ready now to make our first block. So we're going to need one of these and a dark segment. We're going to need one of that size and one of that size of the lighter colors. Same thing with the dark. Then we need two of these longer pieces, two of these, one square, and we'll take them to the sewing machine. The layout for the block is pretty easy. We're going to start with a background and a long piece there. And then the same thing is going to go down in this far corner. Then we're going to have the pieced unit here with one piece right on top of it, and I think that's going to fit right there. And then the light piece unit is going to go here with the background piece there. And then in the middle, all we've got is three pieces. That guy goes right in the middle, the dark one goes on the bottom, the light one goes on the top. And of course, if you don't like those two fabrics next to each other, you can turn that around. So we're going to make that row, and that row. So let's start by putting these two guys together. I'm just going to finger press for now, and we always want to put the seam allowance toward the dark where we can, and we can here, so we'll press it that way. Now we'll get these two guys, and again I'm going to press away from the background and toward the darker color. Now we'll put these two together. Press towards the dark. Same thing with this guy. Now we can make this whole row and this whole row. And I'm going to press towards these two guys. And the pattern has a very nice diagram with arrows that shows you which way to press all your seam allowances. You don't have to remember any of this. Now we've just got one row that goes right in the middle. Last step is to put all three sections together, and if you like to stop in the middle and iron all of these before you sew them, you can, but they're pretty stable and pretty flat. So I'm just going to wait till I have the whole block done, and then I will iron. There's only one intersection to match, and that's right here. And the seam allowances are going in opposite directions, so it's very easy to feel with your finger if you've got those lined up. And for these long block seams, I'm just going to press them all to one side. So we've got that one, and then one more seam. And that's the whole block. Now it looks a little unremarkable right now, but wait till we get a whole bunch of them done and turn them different ways when we lay out the quilt, and you'll see how nice these can look. The blocks are all done, and now we get to see what the quilt will look like. So first row, we've got the dark on the bottom. The next one, we're just going to flip it around and put the dark on the top. So the first row just alternates like this the whole way across. And it's only a 4x5 quilt, the size I'm making, so it'll be super quick to lay it out. Second row, just the opposite. We're going to put the light on the bottom, and then we're going to put the dark on the bottom. And I'm not going to worry too much right now. If fabrics line up like I've got these two lined up, we'll switch the blocks around after we get it all laid out correctly. There, now that all the blocks are laid out, you can start to see we've got a dark, dark, dark. They're all lined up in diagonal rows. And if you have some that match up, like this is the same fabric here and I'd prefer a variety, just take two and switch them up like that. Or you can turn them around, you can do whatever you want, but I like to get the colors balanced, and I like to not have the same piece lined up. So I'll check for all that, and then I'm going to add some borders, and we'll get it onto the quilting machine. I've got the quilt all loaded up, and I've got lots of thread choices to choose from here. I think I would like the thread to show a little bit more prominently on this quilt, because we have these nice backgrounds where we can make the quilting show. That one matches perfect, but it's not going to show very much in that light area. We could go with a deep purple. Now that's going to show a lot in here. It's not going to fight with the light patchwork, so that's an option. This one's a couple shades lighter, a little bit bluer. That would look pretty good. And I also picked out a couple of these variegated threads. Let's see how that'll show up. That'll show up. It doesn't change color a lot, just a little bit. And then we've got this green, blue, yellow. I think I'm going to go with this variegated. I think that'll be very interesting. For the quilting pattern, I'm using one called Clematis. I really like the shape of the flowers, and I especially like these leaves with the little spines showing there. The side steps quilt is all done, and I'm really pleased with how the borders frame it so nicely. You can make such a difference to your quilt by adding borders. This one, the pattern called for a great big border here, and I had this large scale floral print. I think it just looks perfect. I switched the order of these So the pattern calls for a bigger border first, then a little teeny border. I just thought this would look a little bit better with the teeny border first. And this border is made with some of the extra jelly roll strips that I had left over that I didn't use in the patchwork. The quilting looks really nice in here. I love the flowers, I love the leaves, and even on the back side, even though it's dark, the thread is slightly lighter, and you can see that all over there. It looks really, really nice. That light green binding, it's the same as the inner border, frames it quite nicely. I think it finished, let's see, 59 by 69. This would look great in a bigger size, but look at how you can see those steps of colors. They really show up now that we've got the whole quilt done. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting! Hi, I'm Donna Jordan from Jordan Fabrics. Today I'd like to make the friendship chain pattern. This looks very interesting. I love the colors on it, but I want to use a multicolored jelly roll. So we'll use this one from Moda, and it's called Mave. The pattern shows two distinct colors here. We've got the blues and we've got the reds. I think I want to just mix it all up. I think this would look good out of scraps, and I think it will look good in lots of different colors. I'm going to make the lap size, which is what's showing on the front side. So we need some strips, we need some background, and we need some borders. So let's get started. The cutting is pretty easy. Most of the strips, we're just going to cut them in half. So we have a piece that's about 20 by 2.5 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and just slice all of these in half. Feel free to separate your strips into two color piles if you like. So we might pick out these darker and purpler ones for where the pattern calls for blue, and then we could use these pinker ones for where the pattern calls for red, and that will give us more of that chain look. The next thing we need are some background strips. There's just a couple different sizes. I can't give you the exact sizes because it's not my pattern, but Cozy Quilts patterns are very easy to follow. I like to use a little dumbbell weight here to hold my ruler down when I'm cutting strips. It's almost like a third hand up there, so I can hold it here, the weight will hold it there, and it tends to not move at all if you do that. I've got a few more to cut, but all of these strips also get cut right in half right along the fold. Next step is to make some strip sets. The first strip set is going to have one of these, then you can pick an alternate color, and then a background. And then we'll pick a different one from this stack, and a different one from this stack. And we'll end with that. So we're going to take these to the sewing machine and sew them side by side. To make the strip set, we've just got 5 strips. So we're just going to put one on, then the next, then the next. And I'm just lining up those pinked edges, stitching all the way down and making sure I don't stretch either one of the strips. And I find it a lot easier if I finger press each seam as I go. So I'm going to press these all to one side. So I'm going to open this up here, kind of anchor it, and then pull my fingernail or even the pad of my finger right down this seam as I open it up with my hands there. And that makes it nice and flat. It'll make the ironing later on much easier. Actually, I had a second thought about the way this seam is going to go. Instead of going towards the light, I want it to go towards the dark. It's always better to go towards the dark if you can, then you won't get any shadowing from your seam allowance over here. So I'm going to press this away from the background, and I will do that with the next strip that comes on. I'll go away from the background and then towards the edge. even though it's been finger pressed, we do want to iron it nice and flat. So I usually smooth it out with my hands so I can make sure I can feel those seam allowances going the way I want. And then I just press each one a little bit individually. And then add a little steam. I've gone ahead and stitched together the other 2 strip units we need. There's still 5 pieces in each of them, but the fabrics are in a little bit different order. We need multiples of all of these, but once we have all those done, the procedure is the same for every one. We're going to take these and we're going to subcut them. So I'm just going to cut off a little piece at the beginning here. And we'll get 8 strip units just like this from each of these. So I'm going to make all of the rest of these and get them all cut up, and then we'll be ready to put them together to make our first block. I'm here at the machine. I've got 2 of this strip unit we made first, and then I've got 2 of the second one and 1 of the third, and we're just going to sew these side by side. And I am going to press these all the same direction. So I'm just going to open it up, give it a little finger press, and keep adding the pieces. We'll go ahead and give it a quick press. And because I separated the fabrics just a little bit, we are starting to see some little trails of color here, and I'm very happy with how that's turning out. For our second block, we're going to cut some of our remaining strips into squares, and we're going to make some half square triangles. Now, the easiest method to make these is to mark a line right across the diagonal on the back, and I'm going to get a pencil and show you how I do it. I like to put the ruler down not exactly from corner to corner because the pencil has a little width, so I move it over ever so slightly so that when I draw, it is actually from corner to corner. So now all we have to do is put one of these on top of one of these and then stitch right along the line or slightly to this side of it. Because when you fold, we're going to fold along that line. Fabric doesn't fold completely flat. And if we sew just a little bit to the side, when we open this up, everything will match there. Now, if you don't like to mark them, you can mark your machine. There's tapes you can put on your machine. If you're really brave, you can just go from corner to corner. I've made so many of these that I will often do this. I will just start in this corner and aim for the other corner. And check before you do a whole bunch of them. Make sure that everything is meeting up there, and it looks like it is. So we'll go ahead and make a bunch of these. Next step is to fold this open, and I like to do that by putting the background down and folding open the print, making sure the edges line up, and then give it a little pressing. Then let's trim away these back 2 layers so we don't have so much bulk. So I'm going to cut it so there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance left. You can use your blade or you can use scissors like I did. Here's how the next block starts. We're going to use a print in the middle, and we're going to use 4 of these backgrounds in all 4 corners. Then we're going to pick 4 of these guys out, and we're just going to twirl them around the center. So this one gets twirled once. You can always just put it here, twirl it the same way. This one here, 1 twirl there, and it makes a little star. So all we have to do is sew them in rows, sew the rows together. For pressing the seam allowances, you have to make a decision. I like to press these to the outside because there's extra bulk here, but that means we're pressing them towards the lightest color. So let's just see how that will work out. I really do think that will make the block the flattest. So we'll press those away and we'll press these towards the center, which works out well because we've got these extra seam allowances there. And then these two will go to the outside, and this will lay nice and flat when we sew these rows together. To finish up the block, all we need to do is cut some strips out of this, and those will go on the top and bottom of this block. Then we'll take our remaining strips, sew them on either side of the background, cut it into strip units, and then those pieces will go here and here with these in the corners. And then our second block will be done, and we'll be ready to lay the quilt out. I've got all of each block done, and we're ready to lay them out. This is always the most fun part for me. So the block can be turned any way. It's the same in all directions. We'll do one of those and one of these, and we're just going to alternate throughout the quilt. That's all the blocks. I haven't even looked to see if there's any color matches anywhere. So if I end up with two of the same here, I'm just going to spin the block around. It just is automatically very balanced and very good looking. Now is a good time to take a picture with your camera and make sure all your stars are turned to the right way. When I made them earlier, I had a couple blocks turned the wrong way. Very easy to stitch it together from here. You just make the rows, sew the rows together. Then we're going to have an inner border that's the same as the background, and we'll do a printed outside border of something flowery, and we'll get it loaded onto the quilting machine. I've got the quilt all loaded up, and now we get, whoa, to pick a thread color. There's lots of them that would work. I was interested in doing the gold. There are some gold prints in here, and it does make a nice neutral. That would work. Of course, we could use this dark lilac color here. Matches very well. I don't think I'm going to want something that dark in the background. Same with this one. If you want your quilting to show, it would be a good choice. I just think I want something a little more subtle. This isn't going to show at all in the background. Doesn't really fight with the top. But I do think the lavender is the best choice. Pink matches well. This blends a little better in the darker areas. For the quilting pattern, I'm going to do posies. This is one of my favorite patterns. Let me make it a little bigger so you can see. Whoops, wrong way. I like the leaves, I like the flowers, and almost all of the prints in the quilt have flowers, so I think this will look really good. The friendship chain quilt is all done. I'm very happy with how it turned out. I used darker prints in all of the stars, so they are pretty prominent. So when I picked out all the fabrics I was going to use, I left those aside to use here. Then you can see a slight color change, a little bit pinker here, a little bit purpler here. Now you don't have to do that. If you're making this with scraps or a multicolored jelly roll, this would look great even if there weren't some different color bands there. The pattern, it calls for 21 and 26 strips, but I was actually able to get it all from one jelly roll. So I had some pieces left like this, I had a couple strips left, and I had to take a couple pieces apart to make maybe the last few of these, but I didn't need any extra strips for my quilt. You might want to buy extra fabric because then you can get better color choices of what goes where. The quilting pattern, it's very understated, but you can see these flowers here. You can see that nice leaf. I love this pinkish magenta binding. And let's see what the back looks like. Ah, lovely print. Quilting totally recedes, but we've got these nice daisies here. I don't know if I mentioned, this is a collection from Moda called Maeve. Really nice and cheerful. Very happy with how it turned out. Now, if you like our tutorials and you want to support us, the best thing you can do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That really helps us out. Happy quilting!